The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon or good morning. Welcome to the monthly Dalim Tips and Tricks webinar. This month it's going to be a twist-centric topic. My name is Mike Moscato from Blanchard.
With visuals this month.
Yeah, that's right. You can actually see it, I think. That probably means my microphone's not working, but I'll talk anyways. That's what I like to do. The topic this month is we're going to go over the Actions tab in PsCheck and go a little deeper and look at something that's referred to as changeObject scripts. Now, this is not a new feature in ES, but I suspect there are certain aspects of it, especially if you kind of dig beneath the surface, that you may not be familiar with or that you might want to get coached up on a little. We always mention that if your display isn't scaled right on your screen, there should be a little button there where you can get it to zoom or scale based on the resolution of your monitor, and then you can see all the goodies. So let's basically look at what I'm going to talk about today. If you know Twist, and I suspect you folks who are on here today do, in the PsCheck tool, there's this tab called Actions. And we're going to look at the basics of how that works. It's, you know, if you've seen it before, you may have just kind of glanced over and said, you know, this thing doesn't do much. It does do a few things. And we're also going to look under the hood at the param file, the PsCheck. We're going to look at how these things are constructed. And once we see how those are constructed, we're going to create more complex actions that are really not possible just through the GUI. And we're going to hopefully strip apart the syntax that you have to write to make one of these scripts, because it is definitely non-obvious. And I'm going to go through a couple different routines that allow us to manipulate different objects on a page, change color, change overprints, and target specific objects in a page based on their type, their color, other things. And yeah, is this what I'm talking about? Is this thing? Well, yeah, it is. I'm talking about that Actions tab, but there's a whole lot more that goes on beneath it. And we're going to look at how to manipulate that stuff to achieve our ends, assuming we have something we want to achieve. Now, before we dive a little further, I think you have to be clear about what the capabilities of this stuff are. You know, it's not, we're not going to build, you know, a rocket ship to Mars with it. It's nothing too crazy, but it does give us the ability to control overprints, knockouts, change colors of different objects. You'll see this term right here where it says constraint. Constraint is a way we can define specific attributes of the objects we want to change and then tell it what we want to do to them. Now, there are other tools in ES that, I mean, in Twist, that kind of sort of do these things, right? If you want to force overprint in the PsCheck tool, you've got the that force overprint option in PsCheck. In fact, let's step into Twist now. You know this one, where if you go into the colors, you know, you got this guy, force overprint, but there are more granular ways that you can control that we're going to look at. And in terms of swapping colors, changing colors, convert to CMYK, you know that you can do that sort of stuff in the separation map tool, right? That guy. But even he is kind of limited because he's basically changing the entire page and every object of the page. And what we're going to do is be able to target specific objects that we want to goof around with. So let's start with the simplest stuff, right? And then we'll try to build from there. And one thing I'll point out is, I think with the exception of one example that I'm going to show you, everything we're going to see today has actually been used at customers. It was either they had a specific request and we showed them how to do it, or they kind of knew how to do it, but they kind of missed something along the way. This, I think, is the most common one I've seen over the years. People want to control, they got a die line channel in there, right? They want to force it to overprint. Now, I happened to find a fabulous die line file because it's a donut box. It's 6 donuts in that box. So I'm liking it. So the file on the right is the original donut box. It's disgusting I have to depend on pit stop, but sometimes it's just handy. So if we look at the die line over here in this guy, he's going to go real slow for me now. Well, I'll tell you right now, the original, it's knockout, right? There he is, he's KO. So I ran this thing through Twist, through that fabulous workflow we just looked at. And what do we have now? If it'll ever stop spinning the ball, it's still knockout. So at this point, you have to conclude that I don't know what I'm doing. But here's the point. If you look at this thing, I spelled this thing die line with a capital D. And that this, one of the issues you'll get sometimes with these sort of things is people spell it every way from Sunday. That may be all caps, maybe just a capital D and lowercase like that. Or they might do it all lowercase. And there's the cat right on cue. So one thing you can do, and since that's hard to read, I'll show it to you instead over here. You can just make a regular expression for the channel name you're interested in. And that's kind of a convoluted one, but that basically means if you at least know how to spell die line, right? Any combination of upper or lower case is going to work with it. Now, if they don't know how to spell die line, there's really only so much stupidity we can cover for it. So we have to assume a certain basic knowledge that they have, right? So let's see if this will work for us now. And I got to find that file. I'm sure it's staring me right in the face. There he is. And I'm just going to run, after this file, I'm going to start running the same file over and over through different workflows. And it ain't going to take long. What did that take? Maybe 3 seconds. So let's see what we have now. There's my die line. Let's open them up. And now he's overprinting. Frankly, that is the most basic routine you can run here. And again, it's one I've seen plenty of times. So here's one that I know we had a customer a few years ago who needed to do this. Every metallic ink that they ran, they needed to knock out. So again, just within the GUI, we didn't get to the good stuff yet. But from within here, you can make a regular expression that covers basically every metallic ink there is. And again, I've got this thing sitting in here. So this is, the metallics are the 871 through 9, and also these 8,000. So that's just a regular expression. It's Pantone this or that, right? So if we look at this ridiculous test page that we're going to start working with. This page has pretty much every different scenario we're going to try to goof around with, right? So I purposely have these 2 Pantones at the top, that green guy and this guy here, set to overprint. So obviously the hope is, after it comes through here, those things should KO. And, you know, I think in a lot of respects, you know, we don't assume that the files are always going to be made up incorrectly. But in certain respects, this stuff serves as a sort of a backstop in case they are. So we can always make sure that if for some reason things come in wrong, we can get them to go out properly. And I think you can see now these guys are both KO and KO. So let's now start preparing to get into some more interesting things. This is a feature that's been in here for a while, and it's something called, ignore that, that's that metallic thing up top. We're going to look at this. There's an action here called set stroke. What does it do? The purpose is to fatten up text, specifically, in this case, text that is between 1 point and 5 point, right? Now, if you look at how much I'm fattening it, I'm just going 1/10 of a point. And from what I've seen in testing this, if you just put 1 point in there, it will be too much because it's not physically changing the font size and making it 1 point bigger. It's putting a stroke around that. So I'm going to run my same file again. And I happen to have some real tiny text hanging around in here. So if we look at that guy, probably going to crash Acrobat here in a second, having too many files open. Let's look at the lower right-hand corner. Here's my small text. And it's hard to know without knowing what it originally looked like. Yeah, I think I'm going to have to close Acrobat because it is just gagging. But both that guy and that guy, they're 4 point. They got fattened up, which is good, and that's what I asked it to do. But generally speaking, I'm not sure you want to take all text and fatten it up. And here's where we'll start getting into how to make these things a little more narrow. And what I recall from several years ago is we did have requests from customers who wanted to take small text, maybe 4 or 5 points, but only if it was knockout white text and they wanted to spread it. And specifically, they wanted to spread it with the trapping tool. But the way Dalim's trap tool works, there's no way you can just tell it, white object, just make yourself fatter. It won't do it. But we can do it with this little feature here. Now, I want you to notice something. Remember when I just showed this to you a second ago, I was using the default setup. So you can see the GUI allows me to make all my options or settings inside. But let's close that. Got too many workflows open here. Notice this action now is grayed out. I can't do anything with it. And the reason I can't is because I physically went into the param file and I edited it. So we're going to now start getting into how you edit these things. If you go into expert editing, and this is hard to read, so I'm going to get out to a text editor in a second. But if you look down in this section where you see it say change object, this is the instructions that are telling Twist what to do. So I happen to have that one open here, and we're going to compare the default with a method to get it to hit only white knockout text. And we're going to now start stripping apart what these things are. Now, first of all, you can see the syntax in here. You may have heard change object script, and you might have heard, oh, scripting, it's like tickle script, or I'll do some shell scripting. No, that's not what we're going to do. If only that was what we were going to do. But the syntax in here is very particular. And let's break down first the default that we used. So what does it do? You'll see lines with the term constraint. Constraint means an attribute. So when we did it earlier, we told it all text, minimum size 1 point, maximum size 5 point. And what is the type of object we want to hit? We only want to hit text objects. You can also tell it to hit vector objects. And then what do we want to do to it, right? So if you see a line like this where it doesn't mention a constraint, what it's actually discussing is what's going to be changed. So it will only change text objects. What's it going to do? It's going to run this action called setStroke, and it's going to assign it a specific width. Fair enough, but we just saw that that hit the knockout text and the black text. So if you look up top, this is the same, right? But you'll notice there's a second constraint that we put on it. So now we're saying not only does the text have to be between 1 and 5 points, but all channels of the text have to be 0. Max value 0, min value 0. I probably could have just put 0 there. I think that would have worked. And you have to define a type for this constraint. The type is color, okay? And the other stuff below is the same. So what we did is we took a default action of the GUI and we modified it for our own ends. So let's see if that does what we want it to do. I'm gonna run the same file. You're gonna get sick of looking at this file after a while. So let's go take a look. So now we should have fattened up white text, but his buddy below should still be skinny as he was before. And I think you can see pretty obviously, like in the descenders on the Y, he's fattened up, he's not. You can even see it on the E here, how the inside is smaller than we have out here. Again, this was something I recall from a few years ago. I'm not sure if it's something people still want to do, but that works quite well to target that small KO text and fatten him up. Let's close him up. Oh, let's see, the next one we want to look at. Yeah, I remember this one. Let's look at our page. This is another one we had many years ago. When you get very large text in a page, and for my example, I'm using 72-point text. The stuff is 72. You often, especially if it's on top of a CT, you want it to KO. You want it to knock out. Otherwise, if you got big text, you got all that image shown underneath it. But let's say any text below a certain threshold, you want it to overprint. Now, if you look at my description here, it's completely backwards because I purposely set the large text to overprint and I purposely set the small text to knock out. So what we need to accomplish in the workflow is we need to be able to tell it anything in a certain range, if you're hunting black text, KO, anything in another range, overprint. First, I'll run the file, then I'll show you how we do it. Yeah, that guy. Same file. And let's go catch him. So this one should be pretty easy. Large text should knock out. He does. Small text should overprint. He does. So how did we do it? Oh, and actually, I want to show you one other point, though. See this text down here? He's 80% black, but you can probably tell from just seeing on the screen, He's overprinting. So we're going to go over first how I got this to work in the first place, and second, how to fix it, because frankly, I'd suspect you don't want something like 80% black to overprint, or maybe you do, but we'll cover how to control that. So that is this guy. So this one is broken up into two separate actions. Let's look at the first action. What are the constraints? The black channel must be, and here's where you're going to see some interesting stuff. Minimum value 1, maximum value 255. And you go, wait a minute, that looks like you're talking RGB here. We're talking CMYK. Yeah, we are, but the way that this works is 255 represents 100. 0 represents 0. So for instance, if someone told you, I want to target a 50% black, the value you would put in here is 128. So again, that's where you get into some of this weirdo syntax that we're working on, right? So the constraint in terms of color is between 1 and 100. Second constraint is text size. So this is the smaller text. I said anything between 1 point and 68. I don't know why I didn't do 71, but I didn't. I want you to overprint. Fill color action, force overprint. The object type is text. And you typically should also include the stroke color. If there's strokes in it, the same color, you want them to do the same thing. Now here's my big text. Anything between 72, and I had to pick something, so I said 700. I don't know if anybody prints 700 point text, but it'll cover it. Anything in that range, same color values. The option isn't knockout, it's just disable overprint. So that's how we got that guy to work. But now we're going to say to ourselves, well, that worked, but really not necessarily the way I wanted it, because I didn't want anything that's 80% black to be overprinting. So how can we get that to work for us? Got to make a modification in here. So here's you got to right click, get into expert editing, and get down in here. And let's see here, we're going to go. Let's say you want to allow anything from maybe 98 to 100. So we're going to say like 248. And right here, we're going to say the same thing. So it's not going to be hitting any 80% black anymore. Got to save it, save the workflow. Although now that I think about it, I guess I should check and see. I don't even know what this text is set for. It's probably set to overprint, isn't it? Let's see. No, it's not good. So he shouldn't get forced to overprint. Now let's run it, see what we get. Well, let's close out that one we've got in there right now. Okay, he's done. So the big and small text on the top should have still got manipulated the way we wanted it. But this guy should be KO still. I think he is. Let's see. Yep, still knockout. So you can see how we can change which objects get hit by having a wider color range or narrowing it down like we just did here. Here's a routine that we've had a few people request, and I have to say you should be careful using this one. This is, I want to throw away the trim marks. And I don't want to do any manipulating of the trim box or the bleed box or the media box. I just want to chuck those trim marks out. So first of all, let's confirm that I'm actually working with a file that has trim marks. There they are, got me some trim marks. So let's run it through. Now, the reason this one can be dangerous is because we know trim marks are defined as registration color. They're 100, 100, 100, 100. So if we identify such an object and get Twist to throw it out, the danger is that someone may actually have an object like that in the page that will get tossed out. And you can see there's our page now without trim marks. I kind of like that. And notice also this box down in the lower left, he's registration color too. He's the exact same color as my trim marks were, but he didn't get chucked out. So let's see why that's the case. Trim marks right there. That doesn't look right. Well, let's see. What did we do? Whenever you see something like this, channel star, that's an asterisk. It means I want to hit every channel. And what am I going to do to those channels? I'm going to set, and this is another oddity in some of the values you set. When you're manipulating color on a channel, you can set it to transparent or disable transparency or knockout. If you want it to knock out, you set this thing to 0. And I was discussing this with Fred earlier, and to me, it would be logical to say, well, if you want transparent, it should be 1, right? It should be just be kind of a Boolean. 0 is false, 1's true. No. Transparency value to get it to be transparent is 255. Great. The other thing we're doing, though, is we're setting a value of 0. So what is, if you have object that's 0% and it's transparent, what does it do? It disappears. You don't see it anymore. So that's what we're changing the objects to. And here is where we're telling it which objects we want to hit. Every channel that is solid, 100% in all colors, which is basically registration color. Which objects do we want to hit? We want to hit any vector objects. So far, everything I've said describes that box in the bottom. He's 100% 4 colors. He's a vector object. Why didn't he get thrown out? The reason he didn't get thrown out is this action we ran at the end. This set color is the action you have to define if you want to change the color of objects, and we're changing those trim marks. But notice I ran what's called stroke color action. The trim marks are strokes. That box is just a fill object. So if I wanted to get rid of him as well, there's an extra action you have to have in here that is called fill color action. So again, it's important to note that this guy will hit normal fill objects. This guy only hits strokes. And just for the heck of it, just to see if, make sure I'm not just whistling Dixie here, why don't we change that guy and add him in and see if that box goes away. So we're going to head on down, again, change objects. Let's see, right here, fill color action as well. Let's see what happens. And there's our file. Let's close this out. Lay your bets down, ladies and gentlemen.
Sound like the cat was betting against you.
I say it'll go away. Let's see. Yeah, so we shouldn't have any trims, and we shouldn't have that black box in the bottom anymore. And of course, he's still there.
The cat was right.
Well, that should have worked. I'm going to have to reconsider that.
I didn't see what you pasted. You went through it pretty quickly, so I wasn't sure I put it in there.
Well, I'll tell you, we'll take one look. We don't want to spend all day trying to troubleshoot me not knowing how to type. Let's see. Change object. Fill color action. Oh, very good. There's the problem. The action number is wrong.
No.
Action number 1. Oh, and this is well. Let's run this, but then I'll give you a good warning if you start playing with these things, because a lot of the stuff you see me doing right here, I really only have one action in it, or maybe 2, right? But there's no reason you can't stack 4, 5, 6 actions all together. But what can happen is if you're taking them from different workflows, if you try to copy and paste them in, still there. We must have missed something. But if you try to copy and paste them in, you got to make sure that the numbers jive, because if I already have an action 2 in there, if I paste this guy in and he's called action 2, the 2 are going to fight each other. So you got to make sure you get these things done sequentially. So if you throw him into a guy that's already got an action 2 in him, you better make sure he's action 3. Okay, the next one is one we actually had a few weeks ago from a customer. They had a bunch of text. This is the knucklehead portion of the show, this text here. And again, this happens. I don't really know why. But they had text that was defined as 80, 80, 80, 80. And they had a bunch of pages like this. They wanted to be able to get a quick fix so they didn't have to redo them all. So could we run their files and change all of that squirrely text to 100 black? I think it was overprint. Pretty sure. Let's see if we can do it. And I got one more after this. So that text, what we'll refer to as the knucklehead text, should now be 100 black. If I can select it, and it is. So how did we do that one? What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how we did it, and then I'm going to show you a simpler way to do it. Let's see, that guy right there. See, this one looks pretty long-winded, don't you think? Because look at all the constraints we have on it. Now, again, everything that doesn't say constraint is what we're changing to. So again, we are literally changing the color of the text. So everything we change, we will only change text objects. We're changing the black channel to 255 or, as we know, 100. Now notice the asterisk that comes after here, because again, we're changing 2 colors. So action 1, color 1, black to 100. Action 1, color 2 is everything else. That's that asterisk. Transparency value for everything else is 0. So it's going to knock out. And the value that we're assigning to it is 0. So everything that we identify is going to be 100 black, 0. So here, but look at the constraints. Look at how many of them I had. I had to define the cyan. And again, we were targeting 80%. And if you do the math, that 80% of 255, it kind of falls in that range. Sometimes you need to give it a little wiggle room, right? But I had to make a constraint for every channel, the magenta, the yellow, the black, for all of those guys. And so you might think there should be a better way to do that. And there is, because you saw me earlier when we were goofing around with the die line and we were playing around with the metallic inks, we played with regular expressions. So shouldn't we be able to do that sort of thing in here? We should, if I get the right workflow. So instead of all those, a constraint per channel, we could do this sort of thing. Hopefully you can see that. So I only have one constraint for the channels, and it's for cyan, magenta, yellow, or black. But again, the syntax looks a little less than obvious. Let me paste that in here so you can see what I did. That's the syntax. Star, at, cyan. We know the pipe sign is an or sign, but this stuff before it, again, you might say, oh, where did that come from? So here's a cheater method to figure out how to do that. It's always good to know how to cheat. In fact, this is how I did it, because I didn't really feel like looking through the documentation on it. I did this. I said, I'm going to make a new channel, and I know how to do a regular expression. I'm going to do this. Cyan or yellow or magenta or black, right? I said, all right, I'll do that. Now, how does it represent that? Once I saw how it did it with that business, then I knew how to construct that constraint in my script. And it's getting late, so I won't bore you by running it again, but you'll have to take my word for it that it actually does work. Let's see. I got another one, but it's kind of boring. So I'm not going to show it to you. Instead, I'll show you just a couple quick items that you should know. I don't know how or if we have a mechanism to get information to the webinar attendees, but this is a document. If you are interested in this, is a document you should get your hands on, because this basically describes all of the kind of things I've just been doing, and it has some examples in it as well. These are decent examples to kind of get you up and running and maybe give you a notion of what can be done and some of the, to be generous, some of the oddball syntax that's required to get it done. And I think I had one more slide in Keynote that was semi-useful. I think we've covered that, you know, the components. Oh, but here's one to be aware of. Oops, got to go back. Since typing this stuff out in that expert editor window is not always the most friendly, because you can't enlarge the text. It's kind of hard to see. You might want to do it in your own text editor. So as you're constructing it, you have to make sure that you have that line in there. Change object, do page action equals true. You could have everything done perfectly, but if you forget to do that line, it's not going to do anything. I think we've already talked about this. Object type is the stuff that'll get changed. All means, it means all. Or text vector. I don't think I've ever done line art. Constraint type, it's typically either color or text. Color, you're giving it a color value. Text, you're giving it a size value. And I think you saw this earlier when I was talking about how I hit the stroke only. Stroke color actions, fill color action, and there's also a separate one called fill action and stroke action. Stroke action is how we put the stroke around it. And I won't go too deep into this, but there are also some obscure rules for how you call channels. It's important to remember that if you have a list of several channels for constraints, it reads from the top down. So if the first channel you denote is black, if you put like this, an asterisk after it, or I keep hitting, hit an asterisk after it, or asterisk with the little forward arrow, that basically means the rest of the stuff or the rest of the channels. And for instance, the way you hit all the Pantones, if you want to do one thing to Pantones, but leave the other things alone, your initial constraints could be CMYK, But then if you have an asterisk, maybe as the fifth constraint, that will apply to all the spot colors, or in other words, everything besides the CMYK. If you've worked with the separation map tool or some of the other Dalim tools, they sometimes denote the channel other, right? Other is usually the way they point at the spot colors. And I think that's about all I have for today. Any questions, Fred?
Not much, because I think you'll probably get questions when people start playing with this. One is, well, the documentation question got answered, and is there a limitation on the number of rules you can have on one PsCheck tool?
That's a good question, and I don't know the answer. And as I was discussing earlier, if I wasn't completely lazy, I was going to put all of those rules into one workflow to hit every object in that page in one shot. But, you know, at my age, there's only so much I can do.
Yeah, I got a feeling at some point you'd start stepping on yourself too.
Well, you know, the issue, yeah, is if action one did something, I'm honestly not sure if there's some overlap in terms of the constraints, if action number 6 can step on what action number 1 did. That's a good consideration. You know, I tend to think in general there's usually 3 reactions to this. You know, people say, "Oh, that's interesting," but I'll never use it.
Yeah, I wouldn't see. Well, I mean, I think it's one of those get you out of jail a couple of times type of things. It can definitely help you, like in the case a couple of weeks ago, where
Yeah.
helped in that instance. Somebody was able to clean up some mess that somebody created.
Yeah, especially if you got a big batch of them, right? If it's 1 or 2 files, okay. But if you got a whole bunch of files that you got to get through, this is a quick way to clean them up if it lends itself to it.
Yeah, 'cause in this case, wasn't like a whole catalog got done that way?
I know it was a lot of pages. I don't know if it was a catalog, but it was a bunch.
Someone's asking where the documentation is located. Is it on our systems, or do they have to get it somewhere?
Back in the day, it was on Dalim's site in their knowledge base. I don't know if it's still floating around there, but we could post it somewhere so you could download it. I think it's 5 or 6 pages worth. It's,
Yeah,
if nothing else, you can use one of the default actions right from the action tab, have it create something. Then you could stare at it for a while, but you'll get a notion of what it is. And then if you have that sheet, you can start tweaking it, and you'll slowly get a notion of what you can get away with and how it behaves.
we'll send a link to the documentation to everybody in the webinar.
Yep.
And that's all we got.
So the next webinar, 3rd Wednesday of every month. So I'm not sure what the 3rd Wednesday of next month is, but I'm sure we'll have more invigorating and enlightening information for you.
Absolutely. Mailer will go out as soon as we pick our topic. And again, if you have any ideas for topics, please email us at text@blanchard.com or email me directly at fred@blanchard.com. And we'll be happy to look at it and consider it for a future webinar.
Thanks for attending.
Thanks, everybody.